The morning I found the certified letter taped to my grain dryer was the same morning I realized my peaceful life in Bloomington, Indiana, was about to become a complete nightmare. I stood there in my work boots, coffee mug in hand, staring at the bright orange envelope flapping in the April breeze. The sun was barely up, and I had already planned to start processing the first batch of experimental corn seed from Purdue University by 8 o'clock. Instead, I was reading what appeared to be legal threats written in the most condescending language I had ever encountered. My name is Shepard, and I have lived on this 5-acre property just outside Bloomington for the past 6 years. When I bought the place, it was specifically because the land was zoned agricultural, and I needed space for my grain processing business. I had contracts with Purdue, Indiana University, and several smaller agricultural research firms across the Midwest. My grain dryer was not just some hobby equipment. It was a critical piece of industrial machinery that allowed me to process specialty seeds and grains for academic research and state agricultural programs. The letter demanded I remove the grain dryer within 30 days or face fines of $500 per day. It was signed by someone named Patricia Winters, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Here was the problem. I did not live in Meadowbrook Estates. My property bordered the development, sure, but I had purchased my land 2 years before the first house in that subdivision was even built. My deed was clear. My property taxes were separate. I was not, had never been, and would never be part of their HOA. I crumpled the letter and shoved it in my jacket pocket, heading back toward my farmhouse. The grain dryer hummed steadily in the background, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It was a tall cylindrical structure, painted forest green, about 30 feet high. It sat on a concrete pad near my equipment barn, well within my property lines. It was not an eyesore. It was not loud enough to bother anyone more than 100 yards away. And most importantly, it was completely legal. My phone rang as I reached the porch steps. It was Dr. Raymond Chen from Purdue's agricultural department. "Lucas, good morning," he said cheerfully. "Just confirming you received the seed shipment yesterday. We need those samples processed by the end of next week for the spring planting trials." "Got them," I replied, taking a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm. "I will have everything ready on schedule. No problems on my end." "Excellent. These drought-resistant strains are critical for the research. The state grant depends on us getting viable data this growing season." We talked logistics for a few more minutes before hanging up. I stared at my grain dryer through the kitchen window. This machine processed seeds that could potentially help farmers across Indiana deal with increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. And some HOA president who did not even have jurisdiction over my property wanted it gone because it supposedly ruined her view. I decided to ignore the letter. It was baseless, and I had work to do. That decision lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th day, I came home from a supply run to find a woman standing in my driveway with her hands on her hips. She was maybe 50 years old, with the kind of haircut that screamed, "Let me speak to the manager," and a pantsuit that looked too formal for standing in a gravel driveway. A silver Lexus SUV was parked behind her, blocking my truck. "Are you Lucas Shepard?" she demanded before I even got out of my vehicle. "I am, and you are on my property." "I am Patricia Winters, HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates. I sent you a certified letter regarding that monstrosity." She pointed at my grain dryer like it was a nuclear waste facility. "I got your letter. I also know I am not part of your HOA, so your letter means nothing." Her face flushed red. "Your property directly impacts the property values of our community." That industrial equipment is unacceptable in a residential area. This is not a residential area. It is agricultural land. Check the zoning. The zoning is outdated and inappropriate, Patricia snapped. We have been working with the county to get it changed. In the meantime, you need to remove that eyesore or relocate it to the back of your property where it cannot be seen from our homes. I stepped out of my truck and closed the door firmly. Madam, that equipment cannot be moved without significant expense, and even if it could, I would not move it. It is legally placed on my property, properly permitted, and essential to my business. I process agricultural seeds for Purdue University and other research institutions. That dryer is running almost constantly during processing season. I don't care if you are processing gold for the Federal Reserve, she said, her voice rising. It is unacceptable. Our residents purchase their homes with the expectation of a certain quality of life. Then your residents should have researched what was next door before buying. This equipment was here before your development existed. Patricia pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my property. We will see what the county has to say about this. I am sure there are health and safety violations we can pursue. Feel free to call whoever you want. Now get off my property. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly not used to being told what to do. Finally, she turned on her heel, got in her Lexus, and peeled out of my driveway fast enough to spray gravel. I should have known that would not be the end of it. 2 weeks later, a county inspector showed up unannounced. His name was Gary, and he looked apologetic from the moment he stepped out of his truck. "Lucas Shepard?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "That's me. I am sorry to bother you, but I have to follow up on a complaint. Someone reported unpermitted structures and potential environmental hazards on this property." I sighed. "Let me guess. Patricia Winters from the HOA next door," Gary nodded. "Among others. I have gotten about 15 complaints in the last week, all from Meadowbrook Estates residents." "Can I take a look around?" "Go ahead. Everything is permitted and documented." I walked Gary through my entire operation. I showed him the permits for the grain dryer, the equipment barn, and the processing facility. I showed him the environmental assessments I had done when I first installed the equipment. I showed him my business licenses and my contracts with Purdue and Indiana University. Gary took notes and photos, asking questions that made it clear he understood agricultural operations. After about an hour, he shook his head. "You are completely in compliance. I do not see any violations whatsoever. Your permits are current, your equipment meets all safety standards, and your operation is appropriate for the zoning. Can you tell that to Patricia Winters?" "I will file my report and it will be on record. But honestly, Lucas, this probably will not stop. HOAs can be relentless when they want something, even when they are wrong. What can they actually do to me if I am not part of their association, legally? Nothing directly. But they can make your life difficult by filing complaints, tying you up with inspections, and potentially lobbying the county to change zoning laws." "Can they actually change the zoning?" Gary shrugged. "It is possible but difficult. Agricultural zoning in this area is protected because it predates the residential development. But if they get enough political pressure, anything is possible. I would recommend documenting everything and maybe talking to a lawyer." After Gary left, I sat on my porch and watched the grain dryer cycle through its operation. The low hum was almost meditative. I had built this business from nothing. I had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into equipment and infrastructure. My contracts represented years of relationship, building with academic institutions that depended on reliable, specialized processing services. And now, some HOA president thought she could bully me into abandoning it all, because she did not like looking at industrial equipment from her back deck. I called my lawyer that afternoon. His name was Mitchell Green, and I had used him when I purchased the property and set up my business. "Lucas, good to hear from you," Mitchell said. "What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, reading him the original letter and describing Patricia's visit and the subsequent inspection. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "So you are definitely not part of the HOA. Your property was never included in the development." "Never. I purchased this land in 2019. Meadowbrook Estates did not break ground until 2021. And your property is still zoned agricultural." "Yes." The inspector confirmed everything is in compliance. "Then they have no legal standing to demand anything from you. However, that does not mean they cannot be a nuisance. HOAs have resources, and if they are willing to spend money on legal harassment, they can make your life complicated." "What should I do?" "Document everything. Save all correspondence. If they trespass again, call the police. If they continue to file frivolous complaints, we can potentially pursue harassment charges. In the meantime, I will draft a letter making it clear that you are not subject to their authority, and any further demands will be considered harassment." "How much is this going to cost me?" "The letter will be a few $100s. If it escalates beyond that, we will deal with it as it comes. But Lucas, I want to be honest with you. Even though you are in the right, fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming." "I am not moving my equipment, Mitchell. I understand." "Let me draft that letter. We will go from there." The letter Mitchell sent was professional and thorough. It outlined the legal facts, cited the relevant property laws and zoning regulations, and made it abundantly clear that I was not subject to HOA authority. It also included a warning that any further harassment or trespassing would result in legal action. For about 3 weeks, things were quiet. I processed the Purdue seed samples, delivered them on schedule, and started work on a new contract with Indiana University involving heritage wheat varieties. The grain dryer ran day and night during peak processing times, and everything was going exactly as it should. Then the county sent me a notice about a zoning hearing. The notice stated that Meadowbrook Estates HOA had petitioned to reclassify the surrounding area from agricultural to residential, which would effectively make my business operations non-compliant and potentially force me to cease operations or relocate. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and I was listed as an affected property owner with the right to attend and provide testimony. I called Mitchell immediately. "They are going after the zoning," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "They want to reclassify my property as residential." I saw the notice. This is more aggressive than I expected. Changing zoning is a significant move that requires substantial justification. Can they actually do this? It depends. The county has to consider multiple factors, including the history of the land use, the economic impact of the change, and whether the change serves the public interest. Your business serves Purdue and Indiana University. That is a pretty strong public interest argument. What do I need to do? Prepare testimony. Gather documentation of your contracts, the economic value of your business, and the agricultural importance of what you do. Get letters of support from Purdue, Indiana University, and any other institutions you work with. We need to make it clear that your operation is not just some guy with a hobby. You provide an essential service to state research institutions. I can do that. Good. I will be at the hearing with you. We will fight this. The next 3 weeks were a blur of phone calls, document gathering, and preparation. Dr. Chen at Purdue was immediately supportive, providing a detailed letter explaining the critical nature of my processing services and how difficult it would be to replace them. Indiana University sent a similar letter. I even got support from the Indiana Agricultural Department, which noted that specialized seed processing operations like mine were essential infrastructure for the state's agricultural research capabilities. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept running through what I would say, how I would explain my business to county commissioners who might not understand agricultural operations. I thought about worst-case scenarios where I would have to shut down my business, break my contracts, and potentially declare bankruptcy after losing my livelihood. The hearing was held in the county administration building in Bloomington. The room was larger than I expected, with rows of chairs facing a long table where 5 county commissioners sat. When I arrived with Mitchell, the room was already packed. I recognized faces from Meadowbrook Estates, including Patricia Winters sitting in the front row wearing another power suit. The hearing began with the commissioners explaining the petition. Patricia was called to speak first. She approached the microphone with a folder full of documents and a confident smile. "Thank you for hearing this petition. I am Patricia Winters, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Our community consists of 87 families who purchased homes with the reasonable expectation of a residential neighborhood. Instead, we have been subjected to constant noise, industrial machinery operating at all hours, and the presence of large commercial vehicles and equipment immediately adjacent to our property." She went on for nearly 15 minutes, describing my grain dryer as a dangerous industrial facility and my business as an incompatible commercial operation. She showed pictures she had taken of my property, zooming in on the grain dryer and making it look as imposing as possible. She talked about decreased property values, quality of life concerns, and the need to protect residential neighborhoods from incompatible land uses. The previous agricultural zoning made sense when this area was farmland, Patricia concluded, but times have changed. This area is now residential, and the zoning should reflect that reality. We ask the county to reclassify this area to protect our community and our investments. Several other Meadowbrook residents spoke after Patricia, all echoing her concerns. They talked about noise, they complained about the appearance of my property, and they claimed to worry about environmental impacts despite the inspector's clean report. Then it was my turn. I approached the microphone, my hands shaking slightly. Mitchell gave me an encouraging nod. "My name is Shepard, and I have owned and operated my agricultural processing business on this property since 2019. I want to be very clear about what my business actually does, because I think there have been some misrepresentations." I explained how I process specialty seeds and grains for academic research institutions. I described my contracts with Purdue and Indiana University. I talked about the drought-resistant corn varieties and heritage wheat strains that I had recently processed, and how this research directly benefits Indiana farmers. "My grain dryer is not some unnecessary eyesore," I said, feeling my confidence grow. "It is a critical piece of equipment that allows me to provide specialized services that are difficult to find anywhere in the region. The research I support helps develop crop varieties that can withstand climate change, resist disease, and improve yields for farmers across the state." I submitted the letters from Purdue, Indiana University, and the Agricultural Department. I showed the commissioners my permits, my business licenses, and documentation of my economic impact. This property was agricultural land long before Meadowbrook Estates existed. I purchased it specifically because of the agricultural zoning, and I invested significant capital into building a business based on that zoning. Changing the classification now would not serve the public interest. It would simply protect the preferences of residents who chose to buy homes next to agricultural land and are now unhappy about that choice. Mitchell spoke after me, laying out the legal arguments and citing cases where agricultural operations had been protected from encroaching residential development. He was articulate and persuasive, making it clear that reclassifying the zoning would set a dangerous precedent. The commissioners asked questions, most of which were straightforward. How much noise did the grain dryer make? What were the operating hours? Had there been any actual environmental violations? I answered honestly. The grain dryer produced about 60 decibels of noise at 50 feet, which was quieter than normal conversation. It operated whenever I had seeds to process, which could mean 24 hours during peak season, but it was no louder than a household air conditioner. And no, there had never been any environmental violations. One commissioner, an older woman named Doris Hayes, asked the question that seemed to cut through all the noise. "Mr. Shepard, you have contracts with state universities. If we change the zoning and force you to cease operations, what happens to those contracts?" "I would have to break them," I said simply. "Purdue and Indiana University would have to find another processor, which could take months and would likely be more expensive. Research projects would be delayed. Student theses that depend on processed seed data would be impacted. The ripple effects would extend beyond just my business." Doris nodded thoughtfully and made some notes. After nearly 3 hours of testimony and discussion, the commissioners said they would review all the information and issue a decision within 30 days. I left the hearing exhausted but cautiously hopeful. Mitchell seemed positive. "You did great," he said as we walked to the parking lot. "The fact that you have state university contracts is huge. Commissioners do not want to be seen as hurting academic research and agricultural development." Patricia looked furious, I observed. She expected this to be a slam dunk. Instead, she found out that your business is a lot more legitimate and important than she assumed. That does not mean she will stop fighting, but it does mean the county has to take your side seriously. Over the next 30 days, I tried to focus on work. I had new contracts coming in, including one from Ball State University for processing heirloom corn varieties. The grain dryer kept running, and I kept delivering high-quality results. But in the back of my mind, I was constantly worried about the zoning decision. Patricia did not stay quiet during the waiting period. She started a social media campaign, posting pictures of my property on Facebook and local community forums, claiming I was running an illegal factory next to residential homes. She encouraged Meadowbrook residents to contact the county commissioners and demand the zoning change. I noticed cars driving slowly past my property at odd hours. Some of them stopped to take pictures. Once, I caught someone from Meadowbrook walking onto my land to photograph the grain dryer from a closer angle. I told them to leave and set up security cameras around my property. Mitchell advised me to stay off social media and avoid engaging with Patricia's campaign. "Let your work speak for itself," he said. "Responding to internet drama will just make things worse." It was hard advice to follow when I was reading posts accusing me of being a bad neighbor and a corporate polluter, neither of which was remotely true. But I kept my head down and focused on my contracts. The decision came on a Thursday morning via email. The county had voted 4-1 to deny the rezoning petition, citing the existing agricultural use of the land, the economic and educational value of my business, and the lack of evidence that my operation posed any actual harm to the surrounding area. I called Mitchell immediately. "We won." "You won. The zoning stays agricultural. Your business is protected." I felt a wave of relief so intense I had to sit down. What happens now? Now you go back to work. The HOA could appeal, but they would need new evidence or a significant change in circumstances. This decision gives you solid legal ground to stand on. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Patricia did not take the decision well. Within a week of the announcement, I started noticing strange problems around my property. My mailbox was knocked over twice. Someone spray painted factory farm pollution on my equipment barn in the middle of the night. I reported it to the police, but without any witnesses or camera footage of the perpetrator, there was not much they could do. Then things escalated. I came home one evening to find that someone had tampered with my grain dryer. The control panel had been pried open, and several wires had been cut. The damage was significant enough that the dryer would not operate until I could get it repaired. This was not just vandalism anymore. This was sabotage that directly impacted my ability to fulfill my contracts. I called the police immediately. This time, they sent a detective named Sarah Morrison who took the incident seriously. "You have any idea who might have done this?" she asked, photographing the damage. "I have been having issues with the HOA from Meadowbrook Estates. They have been trying to force me to remove the dryer. We just won a zoning hearing that kept them from shutting down my business. You have evidence linking them to this damage?" "Not directly. But I have had vandalism and harassment ever since the zoning fight started." Detective Morrison gave me her card. "I will investigate. In the meantime, I recommend getting better security cameras, including ones that cover this equipment. If this happens again, we need footage." The repairs to the grain dryer cost me $4,000 and put me 3 days behind on a critical Purdue contract. Dr. Chen was understanding, but I could hear the concern in his voice when I explained what had happened. I installed high-definition security cameras covering every angle of my property, along with motion-activated lights. The cameras fed to a system that saved footage to cloud storage, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, the video would be preserved. 2 nights later, the cameras caught someone. At 2:30 in the morning, a figure in dark clothing and a hoodie climbed over my fence and approached the grain dryer. They carried a bag and moved with clear purpose toward the control panel. I was asleep when the motion alerts went off on my phone. By the time I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, the person was already running back toward the fence. I chased them, shouting for them to stop, but they were faster and disappeared into the darkness. I checked the grain dryer. They had not managed to cause any new damage, probably because they heard me coming. But the intent was clear. I called Detective Morrison immediately, even though it was the middle of the night. "Someone just tried to sabotage my equipment again. I have them on camera." She arrived within 20 minutes, which I appreciated. We reviewed the footage together. The person had been careful to keep their face hidden, but we could see their general build and clothing. "I will have our tech team enhance this footage," Detective Morrison said. "We might be able to get identifying details. Have you noticed anyone from the HOA wearing clothing like this?" "I honestly would not know. I have only met a few of them." "I am going to need a list of HOA board members and anyone you know has been particularly aggressive toward you." I gave her Patricia's name first, along with the names of 3 other Meadowbrook residents who had spoken at the zoning hearing. The next few days were tense. I barely slept, constantly checking my security cameras. Every noise outside made me jump. I was running my business while simultaneously being on high alert for saboteurs. Then Detective Morrison called me with news. We enhanced the footage and got a partial view of the person's face. We also got a clear image of their shoes, which are pretty distinctive. "I am going to need you to come to the station and look at some photos." At the police station, Detective Morrison showed me a series of photos. The third one made my stomach drop. It was a man named Derek Winters, Patricia's husband. "You know him?" Detective Morrison asked, watching my reaction. "That is Patricia Winters' husband. Patricia is the HOA president who has been leading the campaign against my business." "Are you certain?" "100%. I have seen him at her side during some of the HOA confrontations." Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair. "The shoes in the footage match shoes he is wearing in several of his social media photos. That is not enough for an arrest warrant by itself, but it is enough to bring him in for questioning." "What about the earlier vandalism? Can you connect him to that?" "We are working on it. If he cracks during questioning, he might admit to it. But right now, we only have solid evidence for the attempted sabotage that was caught on camera." 2 days later, Derek Winters was arrested and charged with criminal mischief and attempted sabotage. The arrest made local news, particularly because of the connection to the HOA zoning dispute. I expected Patricia to lay low after her husband's arrest. Instead, she doubled down. She held a press conference on her front lawn, claiming that Derek had acted alone out of frustration, and that his actions did not represent the HOA or their legitimate concerns about my business. She pivoted to claiming that I had somehow provoked the situation, and that my industrial operation was still a threat to the community. It was a masterclass in deflection and spin, but it did not change the fact that her husband was facing criminal charges for sabotaging my business. Mitchell called me after seeing the press conference. "This woman is unbelievable. Her husband commits a crime and she turns it into a PR campaign against you. What can I do about it? Honestly, nothing. Let her talk. The facts are on your side and her credibility is damaged. Focus on your business and let the legal system handle Derek." Derek's lawyer tried to argue that the property dispute and my provocative business had pushed Derek to an emotional breaking point. The prosecutor was having none of it. "Your client deliberately destroyed property and attempted sabotage on multiple occasions," the prosecutor said during a pretrial hearing I attended. "This was not an emotional outburst. This was calculated criminal behavior." Derek eventually took a plea deal to avoid a trial. He pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay me $8,000 in restitution for the damage and lost business. The sentencing brought me some satisfaction, but it did not solve my fundamental problem. Patricia was still HOA president, and I knew she was not going to stop. I was right. A month after Derek's sentencing, I received a notice that the HOA was suing me in civil court. The lawsuit claimed that my business operations constituted a nuisance and sought an injunction forcing me to cease operations or relocate the grain dryer. I was furious when I read the complaint. They were arguing the same points that had already been rejected in the zoning hearing, wrapped in legal language about property rights and reasonable use. Mitchell reviewed the lawsuit and shook his head. "This is a harassment suit. They know they probably cannot win, but they can tie you up in court and force you to spend money defending yourself. How much is this going to cost me? Depends on how far they push it. Could be tens of thousands in legal fees, maybe more if it goes to trial." "I do not have that kind of money lying around, Mitchell. I just paid for equipment repairs and lost income from Derek's sabotage." "I know, but you have to fight it. If you let them win by default, you lose everything." We filed a response denying all the allegations and requesting that the case be dismissed. Mitchell argued that the HOA had no standing to sue since I was not part of their association, and that the claims were barred by the zoning decision. The judge scheduled a hearing to consider the motion to dismiss. In the meantime, my legal bills kept mounting. I started a crowdfunding campaign to help with legal expenses, explaining the situation and how I was being harassed by an HOA despite never being part of their association. The story resonated with people who had their own HOA horror stories. Within 2 weeks, I had raised $15,000, which covered a significant portion of my legal costs and gave me the resources to keep fighting. The support was overwhelming and emotional. People from across Indiana and even other states contributed, many leaving comments about their own battles with overreaching HOAs. Dr. Chen from Purdue shared the campaign with the agricultural research community, which brought in even more support. Patricia tried to paint the crowdfunding as a publicity stunt. She went on local radio claiming I was exploiting the situation for money. But the interviewer pushed back, pointing out that her husband had been convicted of sabotaging my business and that her HOA had initiated the lawsuit. The hearing on the motion to dismiss was brief. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret Sullivan, read through the filings and asked pointed questions. "Counselor," she said to the HOA's lawyer, "your client is not a property owner in the HOA, correct?" "Correct, Your Honor, but his property directly impacts our clients. And there was already a zoning hearing that found his business operations to be legal and appropriate, correct?" "Yes, but that was a zoning matter. This is a nuisance claim." Judge Sullivan looked skeptical. "A nuisance claim based on the same facts that were already litigated in the zoning hearing. This looks like an attempt to get a different result by forum shopping." The HOA lawyer tried to argue that the standards were different, but Judge Sullivan cut him off. "I am granting the motion to dismiss. The zoning decision already addressed these issues, and the HOA has not demonstrated standing to bring this claim. Furthermore, this lawsuit appears to be retaliatory in nature following the criminal conviction of the HOA president's husband for sabotaging the defendant's property." She paused and looked directly at the HOA lawyer. "Tell your clients that continued harassment of Mr. Shepard could result in sanctions. This court does not look kindly on the abuse of legal process." I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I had finally won something meaningful. Mitchell was grinning. "That was about as definitive as it gets," he said. "The judge basically called them out for harassment. Is it really over? The lawsuit is over. Whether Patricia gives up, that is another question, but she is running out of legal options." I went home that day and stood in my yard, looking at my grain dryer humming away. It was processing a new batch of seeds from Indiana University, supporting research into disease-resistant soybeans. The work was important. The business was legitimate. And I had fought to protect it against all odds, but I was exhausted. The past several months had drained me financially and emotionally. I had spent more time dealing with lawyers, police, and hearings than actually running my business. Some days I wondered if it was worth it. Then I would get an email from Dr. Chen, or one of the other researchers I worked with, thanking me for the quality of my processing work and explaining how it was contributing to their research. Those emails reminded me why I had started this business in the first place. Patricia went quiet for a while after the dismissed lawsuit. I wondered if she had finally accepted defeat or if she was just regrouping for another assault. The answer came 3 months later when I received a letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. It was not from Patricia. The letter informed me that Patricia had been removed as HOA president following a vote of no confidence by the board. The new president, a man named Carl Henderson, wanted to meet with me to discuss how the HOA and I could coexist peacefully. I was skeptical, but I agreed to the meeting. Carl came to my property, which was more than Patricia had ever been willing to do properly. He was in his early 60s, retired from some corporate job, and seemed genuinely interested in finding a resolution. We walked around my property, and I explained my operation in detail. I showed him the grain dryer, the equipment barn, and the processing areas. I explained the contracts, the research importance, and the economics of my business. Carl listened carefully and asked intelligent questions. At the end of the tour, we sat on my porch and talked. "I want to apologize for how the HOA has treated you," Carl said. "Patricia let this become personal, and it spiraled out of control. What her husband did was completely unacceptable. I appreciate that. I have been doing some research since I became president. Your business predates our development. You have been a good neighbor, despite what Patricia claimed. And frankly, your grain dryer is barely noticeable from most of our properties. The whole thing was blown out of proportion. So what now? Now we leave you alone. The HOA has no intention of pursuing any further action against you. We are going to focus on actual community issues and stop wasting resources on a fight we had no business starting." It was the most reasonable conversation I had had with anyone from Meadowbrook Estates in over a year. "I appreciate that, Carl. I have never wanted to be at war with my neighbors. I just want to run my business and live my life." "Understood. And for what it is worth, several of our residents feel the same way." Patricia had a small but vocal group supporting her, but most people did not care about your grain dryer. We all just want to live peacefully. We shook hands and Carl left. I felt a cautious optimism that maybe, finally, this nightmare was over. Life started to return to normal over the following months. I focused on my contracts, processed seeds for Purdue and Indiana University, and even picked up new clients from Ohio State and the University of Illinois. My business was growing, and the crowdfunding campaign had actually raised my profile in the agricultural research community. Patricia moved out of Meadowbrook Estates 6 months after being removed as HOA president. I heard through the grapevine that she and Derek divorced after his criminal conviction. She sold her house and relocated to another part of Indiana. I never saw her again. Derek completed his probation and paid the restitution in full. I saw him once at a gas station in Bloomington. He looked defeated and did not make eye contact. I did not approach him. There was nothing left to say. The grain dryer kept running, season after season, processing seeds that would end up in research fields across Indiana and beyond. The work I did was small in the grand scheme of things, but it mattered. Every drought-resistant corn variety, every disease-resistant soybean, every heritage grain preserved for future generations passed through my equipment. I expanded my business eventually, adding a second processing unit and hiring 2 part-time employees to help with the workload. The county was supportive, recognizing that my operation was an asset to the local agricultural community. I stayed in touch with Mitchell, though thankfully I did not need legal services anymore. We would get coffee occasionally, and he would shake his head remembering the whole saga. "You know, I have been practicing law for 25 years, he said once. "I have seen a lot of HOA disputes. But Patricia Winters takes the cake. Most HOA boards would have backed off after the zoning hearing. The fact that she pushed it to her husband committing crimes and her getting removed from the board, that is a special level of obsession." "I think she really believed she was protecting her community," I said. "She just could not see past her own assumptions to understand what my business actually was." "That is generous of you. Most people would be more bitter." I was bitter for a while, but ultimately I won. My business survived and grew. Patricia lost her position, her marriage fell apart, and she had to leave the community she claimed to be protecting. I would rather be me than her. Looking back, the whole experience taught me some valuable lessons. I learned that being right is not always enough. You have to be willing to fight for what is right, even when it is expensive and exhausting. I learned that communities can turn toxic when the wrong people are in charge, but they can also correct course when good people step up. Most importantly, I learned that my work matters. When Patricia was trying to shut me down, I sometimes wondered if I should just give up and find a different career. But the support I received from the research community, from fellow farmers and agricultural professionals, and from complete strangers who believed in my right to operate my business, that support reminded me that what I was doing had value. The grain dryer stands in my yard today, still painted forest green, still humming steadily through processing season. When I look at it, I do not see an eyesore or an industrial monstrosity. I see a machine that serves a purpose, that contributes to important research, and that I fought to protect against unreasonable opposition. Sometimes I see people from Meadowbrook Estates driving slowly past my property, but they are not stopping to take hostile pictures anymore. They are just curious, maybe wondering what the fuss was all about. Some of them wave. I wave back. Carl kept his word. The HOA never bothered me again. They focused on maintaining their community spaces and organizing neighborhood events. I was not part of their association, but I was no longer their enemy either. I received an award from the Indiana Agricultural Association last year for my contributions to agricultural research support services. Dr. Chen came to the ceremony, along with representatives from several universities I worked with. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of specialized agricultural services and the challenges small businesses face. I did not mention the HOA fight directly, but everyone in the room knew what I was referring to. The award was not just recognition of my work. It was validation that I had been right to stand my ground. My life is peaceful now. I wake up early, make coffee, and check on my equipment. I process seeds that will become crops that will feed people and advance scientific understanding. I pay my bills, I maintain my equipment, and I sleep well knowing I fought for something worth protecting. The property values in Meadowbrook Estates are fine, by the way. I checked the real estate listings out of curiosity. Homes there sell for exactly what you would expect for the location and quality. My grain dryer did not destroy anyone's investment. It never would have. Patricia was wrong about almost everything. But she was right about one thing. This area did change. It just did not change in the way she wanted. Instead of driving out the agricultural operations that predated the development, the community learned to coexist with them. That is a better outcome than turning farmland into just another homogeneous suburb. I still have my 5 acres. I still have my business. I still have my grain dryer humming away in the background. And I have something Patricia never had: peace of mind knowing I was on the right side of the fight. The whole ordeal lasted about 18 months from that first threatening letter to Patricia moving away. 18 months of stress, legal bills, sabotage, and confrontation. But in the end, justice prevailed. Not because the system is perfect, but because I had the resources, the support, and the determination to see it through. I think about other people who face similar situations without those advantages. How many farmers and small business owners have been driven out by aggressive HOAs simply because they could not afford to fight back? How many legitimate operations have been shut down because legal defense is expensive and exhausting? That is why I speak publicly about my experience now. I have given interviews to agricultural publications and spoken at industry conferences about the challenges of operating near residential developments. I want other people in my situation to know they are not alone and that it is possible to win these fights. The grain dryer keeps running, processing seeds for another growing season. The work continues as it should, and every time I hear it humming in the background, I remember that I almost lost it all because someone thought they had the power to tell me what I could do on my own property. They were wrong. I proved them wrong, and my business is stronger for having survived the test. That is the real ending to this story. Not a dramatic confrontation or a courtroom victory, though those happened. The real ending is the quiet satisfaction of going back to work, of building something that matters, and of knowing that I stood up to bullies and won. The sun rises over my property each morning, illuminating the grain dryer standing tall against the sky. It is a symbol now, not just of my business, but of the principle that being right matters, that fighting for what you believe in is worth the cost, and that communities work best when people respect each other's rights instead of trying to impose their preferences through force. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. I hope she found peace wherever she ended up, but I am glad she learned it away from me and my property. My grain dryer is here to stay, processing seeds for research that will benefit farmers and communities across Indiana and beyond. That is what matters. That is what I fought for, and that is what I will continue to do for as long as my business serves a purpose. The HOA demanded I move my grain dryer. They did not know I was contracted to process seeds for state universities. They found out. And in finding out, they discovered that their power had limits, that their preferences did not override my rights, and that sometimes the fight you pick is the fight you lose. I kept my grain dryer. I kept my business. I kept my dignity, and I kept my property. In the end, that is all that really matters.